why not allow voters to choose bills directly? Could you use this technology because it brings the cost of getting people's opinions on public policy down to practically zero? Could you ask people what they want their legislators to vote on and use high-grade election software to make sure you have a valid, verified result that we can trust, so that we can actually provide that information to legislators, and then more importantly, hold them accountable for how they vote in the session. So that's exactly what we're doing. That's how the Digital Democracy Project was formed.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Business Ninjas. Today I'm here with Ramon Perez, founder and executive director of the Digital Democracy Project. How you doing today, Ramon?
Yeah, it's great, Andrew. I thank you for having me on.
Oh, I appreciate you spending some time with us here on Business Ninjas. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and about the Digital Democracy Project.
Yeah, so the Digital Democracy Project was founded kind of as an idea that evolved over time. I originally set up a nonprofit organization that was meant to be focused on the evolution of our political system, mainly, gerrymandering, nonpartisan redistricting, ranked choice voting, these types of things. It was an advocacy organization.
Okay.
But I work as in AI, technology. So in my quote unquote day job, if you will, I was starting to work with a lot of people over the course of time who were involved in blockchain based work or mobile authentication, biometrics, AI, machine learning, et cetera. And I was sort of watching the evolution of some of these technology projects. I got introduced to the CEO of Voatz, which makes a really interesting mobile voting election software. And I thought, well, what if we could rethink the whole concept and say, why not allow voters to choose bills directly? So could you use this technology because it brings the cost of getting people's opinions on public policy down to practically zero? Could you ask people what they want their legislators to vote on and use high-grade election software to make sure you have a valid, verified result that we can trust, so that we can actually provide that information to legislators, and then more importantly, hold them accountable for how they vote in the session. So that's exactly what we're doing. That's how the Digital Democracy Project was formed. It was an evolution of an idea, but we really launched it in full back in October. So it's been live now for about 4 months. And we're very excited to see the uptake. We've piloted this in Florida.
Okay.
And we've already had a couple of special sessions in Florida that have taken place. There's another special session coming up next week that was just announced on Disney. It's Florida versus Disney round 2. And so our voters will be voting on those bills essentially as they're being created, and we do live tracking and updates so their legislators can see how they want them to vote.
Call me crazy, but the idea of being punitive with Disney, who brings billions of dollars of tourism into the state and has for
largest employer.
It is part of the backbone of the state. The idea that you want to make them unhappy makes no sense to me, but your governor doesn't make sense to me on many topics. So we will not go down that rabbit hole today, I don't think.
We're a nonpartisan organization, so we don't really have a stake in how a bill, what decision is made. Our goal is basically to put it out there to the voters, let the voters make their own decisions, and then on our website, we actually can show the breakdown by legislative district. So we verify voters are U.S. citizens who are registered to vote in Florida by tracking, making sure they're on the voter file from the state, and then verifying their photo ID. So then it gives us the ability to aggregate to a district level to say, well, this representative who represents the 35th Florida Senate district, for example, his voters want him to vote yes on this Disney bill. This other representative in this other district, her voters want her to vote no on this Disney bill. And then all we're doing is providing that information, and then we track how those representatives vote in the session, and we give them a score. Did they represent their district? Yes or no? And then we rank every representative, all 160 of them on the House and the Senate, from best to worst, based on who is most representative of their district. So for us, it doesn't really matter what the policy is.
Sure.
What we are judging them on is whether or not they do a good job representing their voters.
And do the representatives have any access to this data on the?
It's public. You can go, yeah, you can go to digitaldemocracyproject.org. You can see the maps are live. They're continuously updated. So during the session, they have live updates from people who are voting in the app.
That's very important, because at a local level, transparency has faded over time as small market news media outlets and newspapers, which are normally, if you live in a small county, how are you aware of what the legislation and the town council and anybody is doing to represent you? The answer is it's not on the national news, it's in the local newspaper. And as those disappear, platforms like yours become more and more important. So
no, I agree. And in some way, we're trying to kind of fight a rising tide here, because that's exactly right. A lot of the media incentives have gone away from local to basically nationalizing everything. And I think what you lose is, as you pointed out, the public policy that really affects you the most tends to be as local as possible.
Absolutely.
What's happening in your school districts, or what's happening on this road that you want paved, or whatever it is, these things tend to affect you. It's difficult from digital democracy standpoint. The more local you get, actually, the harder the data is to get. So we're trying to actually bridge these different forces. One is that your local city council may not publish any of that data to a way in a machine readable form that we can use and automatically load it into an app. That's a real challenge for us. At the state level, however, there's a really good organization called Open States that is doing exactly that. They scrape the websites of all 50 states, all their legislatures, and then they put it into a machine readable, API accessible form that we can then consume. That's what makes this possible. There is an equivalent to this at the national level. ProPublica does a similar thing for the US Congress. We will roll out federal level digital democracy as part of our roadmap. But I kind of, to your point, a lot of people, I think, miss the fact that the most interesting public policies that are taking place are actually being done at local and state levels right now.
Yeah, I mean, our democracy is fairly thin in this country when you really get down to it. When you look at voter turnout on anything other than a presidential election, it's embarrassing.
Right.
Here in Los Angeles, I remember after Barack Obama won his second term, the very next election cycle, we had 12% voter turnout.
Wow.
Okay. Now,
yeah.
was it a big flashy one with governors and senators? No, but you're talking Supreme Court justices, you're talking about county clerks, you're talking about important, political roles. Right. The idea that you could win an election with 7% of the vote is not exactly what the word democracy is supposed to represent. So anything that can provide more transparency and connectivity between the voter and the bills and laws at hand is thank you for technology that way, really.
We have a lot of structural deficiencies in our process of elections, our political process, and there are a variety of people who are trying to bring innovation into this field. I think what's happening with ranked choice voting is very exciting. Nonpartisan redistricting, trying to eliminate the gerrymandering that has caused such incredible hyperpartisanship by putting the most extreme voices into not just the US Congress, but in every state legislature. But yes, it's going to take a whole ecosystem of innovation, and we just see what we're doing as one of many different new ways to look at what technology brings us, what data brings us, to give voters a continuous process for engaging in public policy, rather than just asking them once every 2 years, once every 4 years to get engaged in something.
Sure.
Which, hey, maybe they can't even get the day off of work to go to the ballot box that day. So we're basically allowing them to vote from their couch. So part of it is convenience and access, and part of it is just providing a lot more information about what's happening in their state capital, or that they would have not otherwise had.
Now, just to clarify, when you say the ability to vote from their couch, now they are logging their opinion about things that their representative are going to vote on. They cannot literally vote from their couch, correct?
Well, interestingly enough, the Voatz app that Voatz has partnered with us to bring digital democracy to life. But Voatz does mobile voting in a variety of districts right now. Actually, Arizona's got this going on. Utah's done this. They've done pilot projects. They mainly started out for military overseas voters. Then they expanded to people with people who have certain disabilities, who have trouble getting to the polls. Yes, so those people can quite literally vote from their couch or from a military base overseas where they download an app, they get verified, they have to be on the voter file, they have to have a photo ID and all that. But then they can vote from wherever they are in the world as long as they have internet access.
And you're using blockchain to secure all of these transactions?
That's exactly right. That's, I think, a main feature of what we liked so much about Voatz is the fact that it's a blockchain backend, because there are some alternatives out there, but you know, I'm just a fundamental believer in the decentralization concept. That, for one, because it makes it unhackable; two, because it makes it auditable, which is really important if you want to make sure that votes weren't changed. You can have third-party auditors who can see that blockchain. They can, you know, they can't necessarily see that John voted for X and Sally voted for Y, but they can see that John voted, they can see that Sally voted, they can see that there was a vote cast for X and a vote cast for Y. They just, it's encrypted the connection, so you have a secret ballot, but the tallies can all add up, and we can confirm that that a verified voter used a vote token to cast a block onto the chain. So that all that technology is made possible in the last decade. Otherwise, this, I don't think you could do this in a way that actually could be secure from cyber threat and also reliable enough that you could expect politicians or legislators to trust the results.
I think it's really important to get the message out that the blockchain is being used in ways like this, because the average person has a knee-jerk reaction, right? The current news cycle around any blockchain technology is all about the nefarious uses and the money grabs and the digital pyramid schemes and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think the average person knows that they are using blockchain technology on a regular basis, depending on what credit card they use or who they bank with.
That's true.
What websites they, if I understand correctly, I think every single MasterCard transaction is now run through blockchain. They don't publicize it because, again, there's a knee-jerk response because of the news cycle. But in your application, it's perfect, right? People need to.
Yes, exactly. Because unfortunately, the cryptocurrency sort of gets tied in with blockchain, but they're actually two different concepts.
Absolutely.
And the blockchain infrastructure is basically just an alternative way to have a database, except that no central organization controls it. And that's the main advantage, so that nobody can manipulate the vote count, because nobody actually could just go in there and edit what's in the database, right? The database basically exists in the case of Voatz, it's like 64 different nodes that are constantly checking against each other to make sure that blocks are being added to the chain correctly. And nobody at Voatz or any external party or any hacker anywhere could actually attack a single place and get access and make a change. That's what gives blockchain so much potency. The reason it's used for cryptocurrency is because obviously for payments, it's the same type of thing. You don't want somebody, you know, you buy a product, you don't want somebody going in and manipulating it and changing what you paid so that it's actually 10 times more expensive. But unfortunately, like the whole crypto scam system, basically the thing with FTX was a Ponzi scheme. That's just good old fashioned fraud. Absolutely. You know.
but again, that's what the news covers because it's exciting. So the average person doesn't necessarily understand the divesting of technology. Well, it's the same it's the same technology being used, but hey, it's just a tool. It can be used for good or evil, of course. And we only seem to hear about the evil parts these days. How many people are on your platform in Florida now?
So we just launched, what did I say, 3-4 months ago. We've already had a few hundred people enroll. We would like to get to 1,000 this year. That's our aim. Ultimately, to make this truly successful, our vision is to have millions of voters through all 50 states voting on the app and telling their legislators how they want them to vote. We are going to need to develop a community in order to get us there, because, you know, Right now, we're rolling out the product. We're rolling out new features as we speak. And we need to prove to the few hundred voters, and maybe 1,000 voters this year in Florida, that this is a legitimate alternative to our current political process, so that they will go out to their friends and their friends and their friends and actually build a community around this. So that's what we're hoping to achieve.
And is this a completely nonprofit venture?
Yes. So yes, Voting Rights Brigade is the actual legal entity that is a nonprofit. Like I say, I founded that back in 2016 before, and any of the technology stuff existed. Digital Democracy Project is basically a project that was established by Voting Rights Brigade and Voatz as partners, along with Open States as the data provider. So yes, it is a non-profit organization. Now, Voatz is a for-profit elections software company, and they are paid by the states and Canada where they are currently running elections. But the Digital Democracy Project is entirely nonprofit. And that's for a reason. And basically, we don't want people feeling like,
of course,
we're putting our thumbs on the scales in some way, trying to push some policy outcome that benefits us financially. I think that was an important, we believe that establishing trust is the most important thing that we can do in this, aside from technology and public policy and all this. If people don't trust the brand, they won't use it. And if people believe we've got some nefarious profit-seeking motive, that I think would prevent people from, they might think we're selling their data, or they might think whatever, because we got to satisfy shareholders. Well, we take away that profit motive, and we are funded by donations from the public, so that we see this as a public service.
Sure, you can't get into the business of banner ads, because then you'd have to start picking and choosing who they are, because
that's true. That's true.
Because somebody will be unhappy no matter who is there, right? So tell me a little bit about Voter Rights Brigade, excuse me.
Right. So like I said, Voting Rights Brigade started out as an advocacy organization. So really it was targeting gerrymandering and closed primary system. And really the concept of how we've gotten into this situation where extremist positions are being represented in our legislative bodies, which were at the beginning designed to force compromise, but that's really not happening, because primarily gerrymandering means that you have almost no competitive districts anymore. You end up with 90% of the House of Representatives, the US Congress, is already decided before a November general election even takes place. They're so red or so blue that there's no real marketplace for ideas. So we're down to the last 10% of Congress people who are actually chosen by the general public. And that's really, really sad.
Oh, it's frightening is what it is.
Exactly. And especially because in a lot of states like Florida, New York, and others, we have a closed primary system. So you have to be a registered member of that party to vote in the party primary. So the percentage of people, if you're in a super red or super blue district, you're talking generally, like Texas is like that. You can have, I think almost their entire congressional delegation was selected by 8% of the electorate.
Well,
that's really terrifying.
That speaks back to my quarterly or whatever cycle of election it was where we had 12% turnout here.
Those people realize that the fix is in. I mean, that's the basic. The reason we have so much disengagement is because people realize that the system doesn't really work. Our process for electing representatives has really not evolved with the times. And in some ways, you could argue it's working precisely by design, except that it was designed by two political parties whose goal is to keep themselves in consolidate power, not necessarily in representing the greatest, consensus.
You are preaching to the choir. We live in what is supposed to be the model democracy on planet Earth. And if I read correctly, we have never elected a single president by the majority of the eligible voting public, because not enough people have ever voted for that to happen. So think about
remarkable.
that for a second. Like 50% voter turnout is an accomplishment in a presidential election. So that means that 26% of the United States get to choose who the president is.
Because of the plurality process in the Electoral College, that might not even be 50% of those who turned out to vote.
Sure.
So
You
yeah.
know, we're in a very polarized time. It's ones and zeros right now, and I don't like it. And it has created a level of division that I don't think I've seen in my lifetime. And maybe
Yeah, I agree.
it's been surfaced because, you know, we have such connectivity and exposure to information that we didn't used to have. Maybe people always felt this way, but um, a
I
two-party
agree with
system
you. I
does
mean,
not represent that many people. It really doesn't, because it just,
no, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I was a military officer for many years. I 13 years in the Air Force, and it pains me to feel like uh, I've fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. I know people who didn't come home or came home in a casket, fighting for the rights of other people in the world, if you will. And the idea of spending essentially 20 years in counterterrorism, and then to see our own democracy feel like it's falling apart, that causes me real suffering, to be honest. And that's a lot of the reason that motivates me to do this. I don't make any money doing this. I volunteer at the time, and a lot of the folks who are working on this project are volunteering their time. And so the reason we do it is because we got to a point where you couldn't have a conversation with your family at Thanksgiving, or
oh,
people just wouldn't show up, right? Because they were too afraid to talk about, the concept of politics would come up, and everybody leaves the room angry. And I know that there have been times where the country has gone through this in the past, but it starts to feel like the structural deficiencies in our system are perpetuating the worst versions of ourselves, and in desperate need of innovation. And that's what we're really hoping to provide.
well, here's a rabbit hole for you. My perspective is that we have devalued some of the most important core elements of society: education, law enforcement, right? Teachers don't make any money. We just made it so that they can't even write off on their taxes the school supplies that they have to buy because the school's not paying for it. It doesn't pay nearly what its value truly represents. So our educational system is a little broken. We hear people marching in the streets saying defund the police, which was the wrong slogan out of the gate. You want to say demilitarize the police, that's one thing. The police need more money, better psyche valves, better training, better, so those are two of the core problems to me that snowball down the line into you have a voting bloc who didn't necessarily get a great education. So if, I'm sorry, but if you're uninformed, it's really easy to rile you up, which is what's been going on in the cycle for the last, let's say 6 years. That's a little 4-year.
I would argue that
we can solve. Yeah,
we can solve any of those problems if we have a functioning democracy. When things are going well in terms of our capacity to work together as a large body of people with different ideas and different experiences, but forced into a collaborative approach to solve common problems, we do a really good job of it. The problem is right now that our elections process and our political system is actually doing quite the opposite. It's forcing division rather than compromise. So anything that we want to solve feels unsolvable because we don't have a mechanism that can get us there. And so that's why I come back to the structural basis. If you haven't built on a foundation, a solid foundation, it doesn't matter what structure you build, it's going to fall over. It's going to be a house of cards. And so we're trying to redefine the foundation in a more solid footing by giving people more direct control over the process of passing legislation.
I can't thank you enough for your efforts, really. I mean, it's important. And like I said, transparency is disappearing on a local level where it's super important. What's the timetable for the expansion of the project into other states?
I've been thinking about this as a 10-year project. I think that our goals are to try to scale up in Florida by 2024. By scaling up, that means we should be having hundreds of thousands of people voting in this app on a regular basis, really. So there's such overwhelming numbers that it's hard for any politician to just say, oh, I'm not sure if I trust this, or small sample size bias, or whatever the case, which I have a statistics background, I totally get. So scaling up in Florida and then scaling out to additional states. So we're already starting to eye some other states. A lot of it is going to depend on how hard is it for a 501c3 voting organization to get access to the voter file. This is a state by state distinction. Florida, it took us a couple months of process to do that. I'm looking at New York. I'm looking at other states as potential because they provide access to the voter file for these purposes as part of state law. So it's not discretionary whether or not they want to, they have to provide it as long as we have a legitimate reason, which we do. So those will be the states we'll be targeting for expansion, and we will kind of go through and do a legal review to see which ones are the best for us to roll out to next. But once essentially the technology, we have one more major feature that we're going to roll out this month, which will be the scorecard, which is the part where we actually automatically track how the legislators voted in the session and match them to what the voters wanted in the app, and score them, right? And score each of them. So once we've built that out, basically our ability to scale is no longer hindered by the technology. It's really only going to be hindered by building a community of getting people enrolled and actually believing in this. And then also which states make it easy for us to scale to because of the voter file.
Now, I know you don't really necessarily have enough of a sample size at this point to see trends, but is a particular political party signing up more than the other?
I will say that we've seen every party, we can't see how people vote in the app, but all we can see is if they are registered to a party, which not everybody is. I think the biggest party registration in Florida is no party at all.
Really? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I think of it as a pretty red state from this side of the country.
You would think so, but if you look at party registration, actually NPA is the largest party affiliation. So we have a lot of NPAs who have signed up for this. We have a lot of Democrats, we have Libertarians, we have Greens. I'm not seeing as many Republicans as I want. I want to keep that balanced with the Democrats. Right now, I think I'm seeing 2-to-1 Democrats to Republicans. And so we need to do more. We as an organization will be targeting more Republican-leaning organizations to see if they can get their members to enroll in the app. And I think if you think about it from the standpoint of incentives, it does kind of make sense. Right now, Florida has a trifecta of Republican leadership. So if you're a Republican, you're not looking necessarily for an alternative approach to tell your legislators how to vote because they're already in Tallahassee doing what you want them to do, in theory, right? And so that, to me, would suggest that they may not be as motivated. Whereas if we go to some other state like California, for example, it might be quite the opposite. It might be that Democrats find it less interesting to enroll in this type of app, and more Republicans do because it's another way to voice their perhaps disapproval with the state leadership. So that's my going assumption right now. We'll be testing that hypothesis as we go forward to other states, but it is incumbent on us to make sure that we keep a balanced sample of voters as we scale, because what we don't want is to scale up and to have 100,000 voters, but they're all leaning to one side. And so then, none of the politicians in Tallahassee will pay attention to it.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, Republicans seem to be more wary of alternative means of voting or digital platforms and all that kind of stuff. As you see on an election day, as the mail-in ballots come in, they are 80% Democratic leaning or whatever they are. So you may have a little slippery slope in terms of comfort level on the receiving end of that message, but it's an important bridge to gap.
It's a good point that you make, and it's interestingly enough, I have had there is a fear of kind of anything new that does seem to come from both parties, because on the Democratic side, there's we are using photo ID as a verification process, right? And so there has been a lot of narrative from the left that photo ID is a form of voter suppression because some people don't have photo ID. On the alternative side, you see a lot of, because of this whole issue with 2022 or really 2020, you have a lot of Republicans who are like, oh, digital voting, that's there's a lot of conspiracy theories. It's going to be it's going to be run by the Democrats. They'll manipulate your vote, blah, blah, blah. So we having to explain a lot of the security, the blockchain, and all that kind of stuff. You know, my point of view is that we can never compromise the security of the approach. So there are going to be people who complain one way or the other, but we're trying to provide security and access. We think we've found a technological solution that allows that to happen. And we just simply put one foot in front of the other and just go to work every day, believing in the approach, and allow people to get comfortable with it as they try it. And the other thing is that we sort of lower the pressure here, because unlike what Voatz is doing in other states like Utah or Arizona, where there are actually legitimate ballots that the state board of elections is paying votes to run mobile voting in a variety of districts. Or Canada, Ontario just did all their municipal elections on the Voatz mobile app. So 500,000 or so people voted through a mobile app. So I think, you know, people are going to get accustomed to it because it is the future. But in the United States, because of the reticence around this type of anything around elections is so scary to people, we've taken the pressure off, because we're saying, well, you're telling your legislators how to vote in the session. You're not actually choosing between candidate X and candidate Y, where the margin of error could be 100 votes. And if you worry that somebody manipulated the election, being off by a couple of votes here or there, that is the difference between somebody far to the left or far to the right. I mean, this part of the process is what makes it so scary to people. It's high stakes because you've got two very polar opposite candidates who might be in a really neck and neck. And so scrutinizing every single ballot becomes, you know, a high stress event. We're basically saying, no, we're letting you vote on every single piece of legislation, and we're just grading your legislators on whether or not they deliver. So in some ways, it actually takes a little bit of the pressure off and lets people try the technology out, have a voice in the process without a lot of the fear of, you know, some sort of Illuminati pulling the strings.
When I say pull back the curtain, we're not making an Oz reference here, right?
Exactly.
So at this point, how are you getting the message out? How are you educating people that this technology exists and that your platform exists? What sort of marketing?
Well, so for one, you know, obviously podcasts like yours, I think, are great. We're trying to do a lot of those just to get to different audiences. We're using digital marketing. We do have a launch video that goes out as Google, YouTube ads. So we've had about 170,000 people who've seen our launch video. YouTube generates a fair amount of traffic to the site. Facebook has actually been a really good mechanism for enrolling voters, because Facebook, we can actually interact and answer people's questions. So they come on, they see our posts, they ask questions about the technology. There are plenty of rants and raves. There's plenty of conspiracy theorizing, but there are legitimate questions in there.
Audience out there.
There is a colorful audience, but in the end, it's doing a lot to drive people to our site once we've done a fair amount of sort of talking to the community and helping assuage some of their concerns. So I think right now probably 60% of our enrollments have actually come through Facebook.
Excellent. Well, fascinating conversation. What's something that you'd like to be celebrating personally and professionally 1 year from now?
1 year from now, I would like us to have hit our target for enrollment. And I would like us to have brought on some grant funding, because we have basically angel funding, if you want to put it in startup terms. We are a startup. I would like to see, you know, some major grant funding come in to take over the growth and the scaling of this project.
And personally?
And personally, I would like to be able to hire some help.
Fair enough. Well, hey, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your service. I have family members who served in that zone with you as well, and have had some of the same political frustrations as you as they return to our fine country. And I do appreciate your service.
I'll do one quick shout out before we go. I work with Veterans for Political Innovation first, so check them out as well. It's a veterans group that is nonpartisan, similar to me, feeling a lot of frustration about what feels like the breakdown of civil society or our democracy. And they're doing a lot of great work in pushing ranked choice voting, nonpartisan redistricting, and things like that. So, give them a look as well.
Excellent. Well, please tell us what your URL is, where they can find the Digital Democracy Project, and what social media channels they can find you on as well.
Yeah, you can go to digitaldemocracyproject.org. You can also find us on Twitter at Vote Brigade. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can search for Digital Democracy or Voting Rights Brigade. You can find us on Facebook, Voting Rights Brigade. So those we've got an Instagram handle as well. I just can't remember it off the top of my head.
See, you do need an assistant. There you go.
Exactly.
Ramon Perez of the Digital Democracy Project, thank you for spending some time with us today on Business Ninjas. It's fascinating. I really appreciate what you're doing, and I hope we can help get the message out, because it's an important one, and people need to know what's going on and how their representatives are or are not representing them.
Thank you, Andrew. No, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.